Security Hub Podcast. Let's go.
You're dealing with an expert in guerrilla warfare. With a man who's the best. With guns, with knives, with his bare hands. A man who's been trained to ignore pain, ignore weather, to live off the land. Job was to dispose of enemy personnel. To kill. Period. Win by attrition.
Happy for that. Darrell, welcome to Security Hub Podcast, man. It's an honor to have you here, brother.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here. Feel privileged. So thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely, man. Just like we started talking earlier, one of the most important things that we can do for the next generation of great Green Berets, paratroopers, Rangers, or Navy SEALs is to share our story. Everybody can relate. When we were coming up, I know that I read tons of stories of Vietnam Green Berets that gave me that little idea that maybe I could do this. Maybe I could be part of this great brotherhood. And if we don't do that, if we don't share our great stories, how are we going to inspire next generation? So I'm proud to be here to dive into your book, Grit to Glory, a Green Beret's journey from West Virginia to the streets of Baghdad. And I can only imagine that it was really tough to grow up in West Virginia.
Yeah, it was, man. It was a tough, definitely came from humble beginnings. Like a lot of guys, actually, we were off the air and I was telling you that I was recently in Fayetteville, North Carolina, for Tom and Jen Satterley's All Secure Foundation, one of their events, where they help special operators. And I was just sitting there amongst my people, which really made me feel at home. Active duty operators, retired operators, their spouses, man, I just felt I was just so much at home. But I sat there and listened to the whole weekend and I kept hearing about trauma, childhood trauma. And it was just like, I heard it over and over. And I was like, it kind of made me feel normal because, I came from an abusive, especially by today's standards, getting beat with spatulas and all kinds of weird stuff. But that was just kind of like a reoccurring theme. It's like, hey, there's a reason why you guys wanted to do what you ended up doing and going to selection and going to the Q course so you could be a protector, because when you were growing up, you probably didn't have anyone protecting you. So you guys make some of the best protectors. And that's why you find yourself in a circle and everybody's had really similar backgrounds. So that was definitely reassuring for me to hear, man. I was just like, wow.
Yeah, we all of a vast majority of the Green Berets, Rangers, SEALs, special operators that I've talked to throughout the course of this experiment all have the same origin story, deeply traumatic. And it's exactly what you just said. You didn't have anybody protecting you. You didn't have anybody that would step in. So you wanted to become that superhero. You wanted to become that protector. And there's no reason why we gravitate to trying to look and act like we're the hardest, meanest motherfuckers out there. But then when you get us amongst our family, when we finally recover and we get healed, we're just giant teddy bears. Because at the end of the day, we wanted to be the fucking protector. The guy that stood on that line and said, no, motherfucker, you're not going to be here knocking heads. And it resonates. Our motto resonates with all of us. We're not the Green Berets of the John Way era, these knights that everybody said, oh, they're clean cut, always by the books. Like, no, the guys like Darrell and everybody that I've talked to, they come from really bad backgrounds, man. Yeah. And how did you find yourself having that little bit of, bravado and guts to say, you know what, I'm going to join the military?
Yeah, it's a great question. Originally, man, I was interested in joining the Marine Corps. That was what caught my attention. And here's why. So, like my grandparents and my one of my uncles was in the Air Force. Grandparents served during World War II. But my dad told me that no one in my family had ever joined the Marine Corps. So I was like, this is my chance to kind of make my name here for my family, part of the legacy. Like I could be the first Utt to go join the Marine Corps. So I was one of those kids running around in high school with the high and tight, wearing the red Marine Corps recruiting t-shirt, had the cool sticker on the back of my car. This is like years before joining, but I thought I was already assimilated in a way, at least for the cool stuff and for the attention. But And actually, I went down that road, dude. I went down the road. My dad was like, hey, if you do join the service, why don't you try to learn a skill? So that way you can go in, learn your skill, get college money, because, we were poor as hell, dude. Get the college money, then you come out and you have a skill, you have college money, and then you can go about your business. And I also, I had a football coach. I got so lucky, man. I had a football coach that was National Guard Special Forces from West Virginia.
Nice.
And he was a sergeant major. I would learn later that he ran our football team, much like a team sergeant ran an ODA. So, but I didn't know that at the time. So he was kind of an intriguing figure for me, but it was like so far beyond my comprehension, like Green Beret, sergeant major, like that was like, so I was just kind of focused on the Marine Corps thing. Had a recruiter, went all the way up to MEPS, and got through everything. Check this out. I was going to be an air traffic controller because that's what I wanted to do. And they were like, yes, of course you can be an air traffic controller, whatever you want. So then when I got up to Beckley, West Virginia, which is where the MEPS, military entrance processing station for those listeners out there. When I got up there, they were like, hey, you don't have the scores to be an air traffic controller. And I was like, fuck. And I was like, well, okay, what do I get to do then? Like, what do I have the scores for? And they're like, well, let me tell you something. Let me tell you what. How bad do you want to be a Marine? I was like, I want to be a Marine really bad. Like, yes, sir. I want to be a Marine. It's like, okay, so you want to be a Marine really bad? Yes, sir. It's like, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do an open contract. You go to Paris Island, and at the end, the Marine Corps will decide what job. And I was like, oh, okay. And then in the meantime that this is going on, I didn't know it at the time, but they had found a cyst in my wrist. No big deal. It was just, I'm not a medical guy. So, I mean, actually they cut it out. It's back again, but non-cancerous, all that. But they found this cyst in my wrist. So they were kind of going back and forth behind the scenes on this cyst. So this guy was pressuring me, be a Marine. And I remember something my dad had told me, if anything is different besides you graduating high school, being an air traffic controller, if anything changes, call me. I was like, okay, I got you, Dad. So I ended up calling my dad. He didn't want me to call my dad. Like, he gave me a lot of pressure. He's like, well, why do you need to call your dad? You said you wanted to be a Marine. You're a man, right? Yeah. You're getting ready to, blah, blah, blah. So I got on the phone with my dad and I said, hey, Dad, I don't have the scores. And he's like, okay, so what does that mean? And I was like, well, they said I could be an open-ended contract and they would tell me what I was going to do at the end of boot camp. And he's like, Darrell, that could mean very, very many things. That could mean that you could be a cook on a big ass Navy ship. And I was like, fuck no, I don't want to do that. And he goes, well, you don't want to do that open-end contract. So he got my mind right. And then I went back in the office. I was prepared to stand up for myself. And then the argument was over because the guy was like, hey, we got your physical back. There's something wrong with your left wrist. You have a cyst. You're going to have to get that removed before you join. So I was like, okay. And then I left Beckley, went back home to Huntington, West Virginia, which is where I'm born and raised. And once I had some time to kind of soak it in and then get my surgery, get the cyst removed, heal up, all that stuff, I was able to think through things. I was like, they fucking lied to me, man. And I say this, like, no disrespect to the Marine Corps, because I love the Marine Corps, man. Those are some badass fucking dudes, some badass chicks. Like, I got nothing but love and respect for my Marine Corps brother and sisters. But I'm just telling you my experience all the way back in like 1989, 1990, they kind of fucked me. So, so I didn't join the Marine Corps. I ended up joining the Army. And man, best decision, because look at where I ended up my career and all the things that I got to do. So, so I know that's a long-winded answer to your question, but I was
it's
initially
perfect, man.
intrigued by, the Marines, and then my football coach, because my football coach was able to take me up to Camp Dawson, West Virginia, which is, you probably well know,
Yeah.
where Delta runs selection. And we got to be practice dummies for the National Guard drill sergeants.
Nice.
We were practice dummies for them before they went to like their summer, basic training, and got to smoke all their trainings and stuff. So we got to experience it a little bit, and it was such a great experience, man. I'm very thankful that I had my dad and I had my football coach.
Yeah. That's the importance of having male role models, man. I can't stress it enough. When guys get out, everybody goes to the identity issue, but one thing that we don't focus on is like reintegrating in a community, establishing yourself in sports, being a coach. Like if you got kids, it's a no-brainer. Being able to be that great mentor for another, generation of great Americans. That's a thing that like it always falls into the radar, but now more than ever we need it. Like just think if you didn't have that National Guard, sergeant major that became a high school football coach there to support you and kind of mentor you along like that. It's a dying breed, man.
Yeah, it really is.
Like alpha males that are willing to, devote their time, because tons of kids are growing up without dads. And the more we just kind of kick that can down the road, the more youth are going to continue moving along this line of just saying, man, fuck it. I'm not good enough for anything. Like it's a big role that we all need to step into, however we can find ourselves. And I know it takes a lot of time and effort, but man, being that role model for a young up and coming teen kid that like doesn't know what he's going to do, maybe looking at the military, that's a huge part of like why National Guard is such a vital aspect of our soft forces, man. Like every day when they're not at drill, they're a walking billboard, man. So kudos to that guy and every other individual out there doing the same thing for the next generation of dudes.
Yeah, man. And that was really one of the things that, that drew me to writing the book. And actually I didn't want to write a book. It wasn't even something that crossed my mind. You and I both lived this life, quiet professional, all that type of stuff. So it was something that really hadn't even crossed my mind. And I'm a guy that loves to give shit to our Navy SEAL brothers, because they're always writing books and they're doing movies. Yep. And I jokingly say that the Navy SEALs are the Kardashians of the special operations community. So, and that's healthy, man. Just like I said with the Marine Corps, I say that just kind of in jest, talking a little shit. I love the SEALs, man. I think they're badass dudes and badass chicks. Nothing but respect and love. But that's how the game is, man. We talk shit, but it wasn't even in my mind to write a book until my very, very first podcast. And I think it was back in maybe the spring of 2022. And even this is kind of a humble story, but my special forces team leader, who's now an instructor up at West Point, he knows a guy's name. You probably know him too, Ryan Fugit. He runs Combat Story. That's his podcast, and it's a successful podcast. And I reached out to my old team leader and I said, hey, can you get me in touch with Ryan Fugit? And he's like, yeah, of course. So I got on the phone with Ryan. I said, hey, man, I just started working at the National Medal of Honor Museum Foundation, Chief of Operations. Our CEO is kind of an interesting dude. He's a Naval Academy grad, MIT grad, Navy SEAL, and a fucking NASA astronaut. Go figure, right? I was like, hey, you probably want this guy on your podcast, right? And he's like, oh yeah, man, he'd be a great guest, of course. And I was like, okay. So I was just trying to set my boss up. Like, I had no interest in being in the podcast, never been on a podcast. And then Ryan was like, hey man, actually, I've heard your name a lot. 10th group guy. And I was like, yep, 10th group guy. And he goes, I'd like for you to be on the show. And I was like, no way, man. He goes, dude, seriously, I've heard your name before. I'd like for you to be on my show. So I went on Ryan's show, did the episode. And afterwards, he's like, dude, you got a lot of really badass stories. I talked to a lot of people. I talked to Delta dudes, SF dudes, Rangers, pilots. Like, you got some really cool ass stories. You should consider writing a book. So that put it in my mind. That was that first little thing. And then I started doing more and more podcasts. And I would say 75-80% of the time, the guys would say, hey, dude, you should write a book. And then, everything that happened with Iraq, everything that happened with Afghanistan, which I just want to be very clear up front, not be a Tim Waltz. Sorry to get political, but I never served a day in Afghanistan. I only served in Iraq. I never did anything in Afghanistan. But I know my brothers and sisters were hurting from what happened in Afghanistan. Like I could just, man, I knew that there was a lot of hurt. So I thought that there's a good way for me to contribute and do something positive. And it's like, hey, man, we had no control over how Iraq and Afghanistan ended. But I know that I learned some really valuable lessons. And I'm not just talking about cool shit like, oh, man, check out this cool mission that we did back in the day, back in the gunfighting days or Wild Wild West. Like, no, man, I really learned some valuable lessons, not just cool shit, but get punched in the face type shit.
Yeah.
And you got to put your big boy pants up and you got to man up because no one's coming to help you. You got to help yourself. And I just thought I had some really valuable lessons, and one thing went to another, and I ended up writing the book. And something that you said earlier, it's like, I was a kid from humble beginnings, rough childhood. And probably a lot of people was like, this dude's not going to amount to much. Like,
yep.
It's just true, man. It's like, I don't blame those people for saying that, but I would say a lot of people are like, man, this kid's not going to amount to much, if anything. And I was able to do it. I was able to go to really high levels, not only just in the military, but on the executive side as well as the chief of operations. And I want this story to inspire, hopefully, if one person reads my book and they're like, man, if that fucking dude from West Virginia could do it, just with, kind of having a stubborn hard head, not quit, like they're going to drag my fucking dead body out of here, then I can do it too. Then it's like success. And something we talked about earlier too, a lot of guys are a little sensitive to people writing books or getting their name out there, or maybe doing podcasts and sharing stories and interviewing guys, talking to guys. That's just the nature of the beast. And like you said, I'm probably going to have to deal with it. But there are a lot of haters, man. Sometimes we're our own worst enemy. But man, I'm with you. I think we got to tell these stories. We got to capture these stories, because just like you, man, I grew up reading about the Rangers and the LRPs and Green Berets in Vietnam and the movies. Like, those things matter. I don't give a fuck who you are. Those things matter.
It absolutely does. And then you said something I want to reiterate. It's that grit it's missing in our American culture right now. The ability to look at an obstacle, an arduous task, and say, I'm going to fucking do this regardless of how difficult it may seem. It may seem impossible. And you'll always have that voice telling you, you can't do it. You can't do it. There's that little voice that you have to fucking hold on to and amplify. I can do it. Every day in selection, every last one of us that made it through there had that same fucking loud voice saying, you're no good. You can't make it. But you had that little voice that said, you can do it. One more day.
I'm so glad you brought up selection, because I know I'm going to share a story with you, and I'm going to know that you either felt the same way, you either saw the same thing, you experienced the same thing. And hopefully this could be powerful for folks out there that are maybe considering joining the Army or going to Special Forces Assessment Selection, or, the Marine Raider, their fucking pipeline, whatever. Yeah. But I know when I got to Special Forces Assessment Selection, I'd been in the military. I was an infantry guy. And we got to talk about, because I was just listening to you and Earl Plumley, who I fucking love, man. Earl Plumley's one of the funniest fucking dudes.
So good, man.
Yeah. I wrote a couple of notes down that I wanted to circle back, but we need to talk about how I ended up in my group, because you guys were talking about that. That shit made me laugh. So I have like 3 notes that I want to cover, hopefully at some point. But
yeah,
I want to Special Forces Assessment Selection, 6 years infantry. I was a staff sergeant when I went to, I'm pretty sure I was a staff sergeant when I went to selection. But I remember showing up, dude, and like looking around, I was like, holy fuck. There were some dudes that look like NFL size football players. Yes. And then I was like, oh shit, man, this dude looks like the Swede from Heartbreak Ridge, you know, the dude that was like Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
I was like, this fucking dude's the Swede, man. And then there's
Yep.
some dudes over here on this side that were like those fucking strong, wiry, like jackrabbits, man, that would
Yep.
just run like fucking 11-minute 2 miles and shit. And it's like, holy fuck, man. Like, I'm not in the category with the NFL football players. I'm not over here in the jackrabbit pile with these dudes that are running 11-minute 2 miles. I'm just like, I had imposter syndrome so bad. And I was like, man, I'm just a normal dude. Like, I'm kind of an infantry knucklehead kind of dude. Like,
Yep.
how am I going to do this? But I think this is something that's, you know, it's hard to measure. And you see it with professional sports when they're drafting football players. You know, Tom Brady's a great example. It's like, man, it's hard to measure what's in that fucking dude's heart and his brain.
So true.
And if you got a guy that really like refuses to quit, like, hey, I'm not quitting this bitch, they will have to drag my fucking lifeless body out of here. That's the only way they're getting me out of here. Because another thing, you know, and I know you probably remember this as well. You know, you would go to bed at night and then you wake up in the next morning and there's a bunch of dudes missing. They would wait until the middle of the night so there'd be less shame.
Yes.
And then they'd say, hey, I'm tapping out. And a lot of those guys that tapped out, man, were those big, strong ass dudes. So I'm so glad that I didn't listen, you know, to my mind and that imposter syndrome, because a lot of those guys didn't make it, bro. Did you have that same experience?
Absolutely. I remember one at the same situation. I looked across and you see, I still remember this guy. I can't remember his name. Yoked out, huge white kid from Utah, just a beast. And I remember he was always ahead of me on the runs, always ahead of me. I'm like, fuck, dude, like this guy's built to be a Green Beret. And then we got to the obstacle course, the Nasty Nick. And this dude is just crushing, gets up to the tallest obstacle. And it's that confidence one where there's no netting and shit. You just have to skip across all those logs and you're fucking high up. Motherfucker eats it. Falls all the way down. Boom. I'm the next guy. Fucking get up there and just go across. I'm like, shit. Okay. And that's when I realized it ain't about how fucking big you are. It ain't about how many fucking muscles and like how if you look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, if you're going to get back up from something like that and get back on that obstacle. And I realized, I looked down and he gets back up. He's not hurt, but he just walks off. It was like, that was it for him. Just, that was it. And then that's when I realized, okay, I'm willing to die for this shit. Yeah. I'm not going back to the 82nd. I'm not walking into that company area with my head down low saying an obstacle fucking beat me or defeated me. Like and the other great thing was just being able to look to your left and right. And I went with a lot of guys from the 82nd and realizing like, okay, like I'm not going to quit. If that guy continues going, I'm not going to fucking quit. Like, and you see guys drop off. It's like, okay, that dude quit. I'm not going to quit. And you just continue pushing through. And that little bit of like positive voice in your head is such a huge thing. Like the negative one's going to always be there if you come from a background like ours. You know, everybody always told you you're not going to amount to shit, but you got to amplify the little one, the little voice, and maybe I got it.
Yeah, you got
to. That motherfucker quit last night.
Yeah, you gotta be positive, and you gotta say like, man, I'm built different. I'm going to do this. Yeah. And I think another thing that I saw there too was having a strong why and having a strong purpose. You know, because I felt like in my mind I wanted to be a Green Beret for the right reasons, because I wasn't really exposed to Green Berets. My first duty station was Fort Ord, California, light infantry. And then I went to Fort Lewis, and we were right beside 2nd Ranger Battalion. I had the fucking slightest idea First Special Forces Group was up there, dude. I never saw those cats. Yeah. So they were like invisible to me. I saw 2nd Ranger Battalion. Those dudes were fucking impressive. But I didn't know First Group existed. Then I got to Fort Campbell, and where I lived on post to where I worked, I was a Rakkasan. I would drive by the ranges, and 5th Group was always out there. And in my eyes, or in my mind as a young infantry dude, I didn't know there's fucking, 50, 60 ODAs at 5th Group. Like, I thought it was like the same dudes out there training all the time. I was like, man, these dudes are intense. They're always shooting, and they had boonie caps. They weren't wearing all the battle rattle that we were. So my why and my purpose, I was like, man, if I'm going to go to combat, I want to go with the best of the best. So I felt like I had a strong why and a strong purpose on why I wanted to be a Green Beret. And I'll tell you, man, I know you saw this as well, or you heard this. The guys that went to selection and they wanted to be a Green Beret because the Green Beret was cool, or they wanted to wear Oakley sunglasses, or they wanted to pick up some chick, all that kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
When fucking your feet look like hamburger and all your skin's gone, and you still got to put that rucksack on your back and go for a 12 miler or a 20 miler or whatever. When your why and your purpose is, I want to wear Oakleys because they're cool, or I want to impress so-and-so back home because I know she's going to think I'm a cool dude if I got a Green Beret. Like that shit doesn't help you.
Yeah.
It doesn't carry over. Those guys quit. And I wonder, do they still have the Shack of Shame out there at Camp McCall, or are they, is that too, that's like, no, man, we can't do that anymore.
Dude, it's funny you bring that up, because that's something that I realized too. It has to be a deeper, like I get messages on my inbox or social media, and they're like, it's always a like superficial reason as to why they want to be a Green Beret. And it's like, man, like it's a calling. Like I'm willing to help anybody, like, but it's not for Instagram. Like,
Yeah.
You're not going to do this career so you can look good on Instagram. Years later afterwards, then you can post and reminisce of the times. But let me tell you, man, like you walk into that team room and you're walking into one of it is the most humbling experience for any human being, walking in there and realizing, oh, fuck, these dudes are about that life. Like if you're not killing yourself every day through your training and your selection, because you want to be with the very best, like don't go into the pipeline. Like you should have this drive to be better and achieve something that's greater than anything you could ever dream of. Not because you want to wear Patagonia uniform and you want to wear a cool guy kit. Like that shit. I don't want to blouse my boots.
I want my blouse to be out there.
Yeah. Like I know for me, it was, I wanted to be with professionals. And I saw the best guys from my company, all of them would go on through selection. Every one of the guys that I looked up to or wanted to like work with, everybody always knew that it's like, okay, you come here to 82nd, get your associate's degree in combat. And then if you want to be a professional and get that master's and doctorate, you got to go to selection. Yeah. Like there's no other way.
Dude, I got to say something about the 82nd, because when I was listening to you and Earl Plumley talk yesterday, you said something that I never fucking heard before. I spent 26 and a half years in the Army and, retired back in January 2017 and still pretty much been, linked and associated with the Army. My son's in the Army now. But you said a term that I'd never fucking heard about the 82nd, and it really blew my mind. I was like, how did I miss this? I mean, I was never part of the 82nd, but you said double aces, like those double aces on your sleeves. And I was like, dude, that's cool as hell. How did I not hear this? It's like, well, I guess I wasn't part of the 82nd, The double
Shout out
aces,
to my old
man,
platoon
I
sergeant.
love it.
Yeah. My platoon sergeant Mac, I'll never forget that guy. And it's funny. You think as your platoon sergeant, like that, the most mature, amazing NCOs, and you reflect back now, Mac was in his 30s, and we looked at this guy like the most professional and like know it all, like, oh, this is God talking to us. I'm like, fuck, he was trying to figure shit out on the fly too. He was just a 30-year-old man in combat with a bunch of fucking kids.
Yeah.
But I never forget that. It's like, you get back from this trip, you're gonna have those fucking double aces. You're gonna be somebody. Like,
I love it.
Continue moving forward. Like, it's not about just fucking being here and like, hey, great, if you want to do this for your career, be conventional. But that man and every other great leader I ever had, they always wanted you to do something better, reach for something higher. Even if they never went to selection, even if they never aspired, they didn't want you to just sit there and just be
average,
an 82nd cat, the average guy. Yeah.
Yeah, but that was cool as hell, man. When I heard the double aces, that was really neat. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very proud of being able to have that lineage, man. I talk about it all the time. Like 18 X-ray, I have so much respect for those cats. Like you come off the street and you go into this life, fuck
Tough.
yeah, dude. Like
Yeah.
that is that is fucking hard. But coming in from the active duty side, being an infantry cat or being a petroleum supply specialist, like that also takes a lot of fucking guts.
Yeah.
Because everybody's gonna doubt, every motherfucker's gonna doubt you. And when you go to selection, a lot of those dudes are gonna be like, he's gonna be back in like 3 days. Like, that's a lot of fucking that's a lot of hate. That's negativity.
It's a lot of pressure too, man. It's a lot of pressure for sure.
Yeah. What was it like for you when you finally decided to say, like, okay, yeah, I've had enough of the light infantry world. It's time for me to go.
Yeah. It's interesting. In July of 1995, I was with the 101st. I was in the 3rd Battalion, 187th Rakkasans. July of 95. I always remember this because my son was born July 1st of 1995. July 24th of 1995, we deployed to Sinai, Egypt for 6 months. Fucking really, really awesome, right? And now my son's in the Army. They just, him and his wife just had a daughter, my granddaughter, and they have 12 weeks of parental leave. So it made my heart proud, dude. Like the Army has a fucking policy, 12 weeks of parental leave, and they gave him every single day of that, man. It really made my heart proud because, that's tough. If, for most people that have had kids, like, man, you have a kid for a couple of weeks and then you leave for 6 months. That's not a really fucking great thing. But anyway, I was in Sinai, Egypt for 6 months and didn't have shit to do, really. I was an E5. I was a team leader at the time, and my squad leader had a mental breakdown. And Sinai, Egypt's like heavy squad leader, because the outposts and all that shit. And we were at checkpoint 3 Bravo, which was the checkpoint where everybody had to travel through. I can't remember the fucking mountain name, but it's where Moses received Mount Sinai. It's where Moses received the 10 Commandments. So a lot of people would go through that checkpoint. That's where we were at. My squad leader had a mental breakdown, and I got a call from my platoon sergeant. He's like, "Hey, man, is Sergeant so and so in the area?" And I was like, "No, he's not here." In the tactical operations center. It's like, "No, he's not here." He goes, "Okay, good. I don't want you to go get him, but I want you to make sure that he doesn't have any access to his weapon, any weapon, ammunition, bayonet." I was like, this is fucking weird. I was like, okay, roger that. But so I was thrust, needless to say, I was thrust into the squad leader position. That was the time I started really focusing, like, hey, I think I might be able to do something else. And because there wasn't a whole lot of shit going on in Sinai, all we could do really is train and get in shape. So I was in ridiculous shape, running, rucking, push-up setups, all that shit. And I was leading a squad, so I thought that was pretty cool. But unfortunately, I came back from that January 96, right before we redeployed. The 101st got into this huge fucking, we're going to be fast rope, like a fast rope kick. So the first few times I started fast rope, and I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. And then I slid down the rope a little too fast and broke my fibula. So that fucking sucked. But I came back from that deployment. I was in, basically had a brace, and I ended up getting a cast and shit once my flight was over. But as soon as I got that bitch off, man, I started right back after it. And I went to selection that September, October 96. And I just kind of like, I had that bug, and I was fortunate enough to make it through. And funny story, because I heard, you and Earl talking about, the different groups and how you came about, the different groups. So we'll check this story out. So I was at Fort Campbell, and because I'm from Huntington, West Virginia, Fort Campbell is like 5 hours from Huntington, West Virginia. So it's not a bad drive, right? You could 4-day weekends, you could go back, see the family and all that shit. So I like that aspect. I also liked hunting and fishing, and Fort Campbell is a great place to hunt and fish.
Yep.
So once I got through selection, I was like trying to strategize and figure out like, how can I come back to fifth group? I didn't know like what fifth group was all about, or, all this kind of shit. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second. But in my mind, I was just thinking like, oh, fifth group is 5 hours from my house or from my home where I grew up, and there's good hunting and fishing. That was kind of my thing. Like, seems like a good place to be for me. So someone, those lawyers in the ranks, they were like, oh, dude, what you need to do before you go to the Q course, you need to go make an appointment to see the fifth group command sergeant's major, and make an appointment and get a letter of acceptance. And if you make it through the Q course, you'll get to come back to fifth group. I was like, fuck, okay, bet, I'll do that. So I went through that process, and the day finally came. I had my appointment with the fifth group command sergeant's major and walked into his office, and he was a very, very nice guy for me just to be a E5 or E6 nobody. Very talkative, very, very nice guy, very professional. And he says, okay, so how can I help you? I was like, I would really like to get a letter of acceptance. I passed selection. I'm getting ready to go to the Q course. I'd like to get a letter of acceptance from you so I could come back to fifth group, be part of this group. And I felt like, I think this might have been before Punked was a big thing, but it was kind of like, he's looking around like, man, is this dude fucking with me? And he's like, so I got to ask you, why do you want to come to fifth group? And I was like, well, Sergeant Major, it's close to where I grew up. I've lived here, my wife and I, my son, we've lived here for the last couple of years. Love the area, love hunting and fishing. And he starts shaking his head. He's like, son, I just don't get a lot of people coming in here asking for letters of acceptance to come to my group. This is a little strange. And I was like, really? He's like, well, I don't know if you know the places that we go, but there's typically no women and no booze. And that's kind of two things that, and I think this goes back to the why and the purpose.
Yep.
Like, that wasn't my why. That wasn't my purpose. But he goes, kind of those things. A lot of people are just like, nope, you guys can keep fifth group. I'll pass. But, so I had this letter of acceptance. It didn't do shit for me, man. It didn't do shit. I went to the Q course. I turned in my letter of acceptance. I was like, dude, this is fucking golden. And then I started talking to everybody in my class. Like, I couldn't find anybody that wanted to go to fifth group. And then I was, part of the 18 Echoes. None of the 18 Echoes wanted to go to fifth group. So I was like, shit, I'm like the only dude. Like, this is a no-brainer. And then after Rob and Sage called my name, they're like, 1st Battalion, 10th Special Forces Group. I was like, where the fuck is that at? It's like, I'm going to Stuttgart, Germany. I would find out much later that I am what you call a language rock. The aptitude, like they wanted guys that knew Arabic, and they're like, man, this dude can barely speak English, and we might want to put him in like an English refresher training before he goes to his team. But they gave me German, an easier language, which I still kind of fucked that up too. But yeah, that was kind of my story. And I got such a big kick out of you and Earl talking about, how you came about with different groups, and Earl watching those videos and shit. I do have to ask you though, because I don't know if I heard how you ended up with 7th, how that transpired.
I was looking for every edge I could in the Q course. And I remember to this day, it was like, I really wanted to be an 18 Delta, and you go through selection, and at the end you sit down with the instructor and they're going through all the things you did great. And I remember when I got selected, it had a visual representation of all the things you did. And it looked like a bullseye. Everything was like physical ability. Everything was right in the center. And then there was one lone thing way off to the side, and it was my math.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
The guy's like, you're great in this, you're great at that. What MOS? And I'm like, 18 Delta. And he's like, you see that? That's your math. You're an 18 Bravo. I'm like, 18 Bravo.
18 Bravo it is.
What language? I was like, I am from Panama.
There you go.
Can we get Spanish? But at the same time, I wanted to go to 10th group. That was the thing. I'm like, man, maybe I can weasel my way in. Oh yeah. Europe, the everything about it. Like, I was like, I would love to go to 110. And I just figured maybe I can weasel my way in.
Oh man.
And it was all the way up through like the end of Sage. I still remember my IODA cadre. He's giving out assignments and he comes up to me. I was like, hey, before you say anything, is there any chance in hell I can go 10th group? And he's like, your last name is fucking Caballero. You're going to 7th group. And I'm like, 7th group it is.
7th group it is.
But you know what? Ultimately, I'm glad I went to where I went.
Me too.
The Red Empire. I can't say enough great things about my time at 7th group. Some of the greatest friends I've ever had in my life. Ultimately, a lot of us, like I said, guys that come from our background, we often are also looking for family. And I'll be the first to say that 7th group also gave me brothers. It gave me the family that I always wanted, people that I knew I could count on, individuals with moral integrity, individuals that when they say what something, they mean it. And that's something that it is, across the board. And I've got friends from every group, and it's one of the greatest things I've ever been able to accomplish in my life, outside of being a husband, outside of being a up and coming dad. Going to 7th group was like the greatest thing I could have gotten out of that experience. It was humbling to go back, not only to the country that I'm from, being able to go back to Panama, being able to go throughout the entire area and experience the things that I did. That's why I always tell people, like, dude, be grateful for whatever God gives you.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. And I know that you experienced this as too, man. When you get to that point and you're just so grateful that you're one of the guys that are graduating, because there's probably, a handful of dudes, maybe even more, that got really bad news. Like, hey man, you didn't make it, or, hey, you just invested a whole year and a half of your life and you're not what we're looking for. So you're going to go back to the 101st or the 82nd or whatever. So just to be able to make it to the end and then to get that news, it might be like a little bit crushing at first, because I really wanted to go to 5th group. But then it was like, hey, you're going to 1st Battalion, 10th group. I was like, well, fuck. Awesome. Wherever that's at, I'm going to go. Like, you're just so grateful that you were one of those guys. It's funny you mentioned Panama, man. We went to Panama for what was that they used to call it? JOTC or JOTB, the Jungle Operations, whatever the fuck it was. But I went there as an infantry guy, man. And that was a fucking crazy experience, man, to be out in the jungle. And that's the first time I ever heard grown men at night, like fucking yelling, screaming and shit because something was crawling on them. And I was one of those guys too, man, as a younger dude. I was like a grabber, like walking and trying to be quiet and shit like that. So I kind of like picked up this habit. I think it was from, I was born and raised in West Virginia. So I went hunting, fishing, trapping, all that shit. And it was just the way I kind of like moved around the woods, and I would kind of like use shit. And in Panama, man, you cannot fucking do that shit, because I think it's called black palm or whatever. It's like those big ass fucking needles from the trees. Like the first time I went and did that, I was like, oh shit, I'm not doing that again. We had a dude that got bit by one of those snakes. I think they travel in twos. I can't remember what they are. Then they talked about like poison dart frogs and shit. I was like, man, this place is crazy. Panama is crazy, dude.
Yeah, there's a lot of shit out there. And I remember being in Peru, going into the jungles there, same thing. Like you go to bed in your little cool guy, hammock, got your netting and everything over you. And then, you fall asleep and you wake up in the middle of the night and you turn on your lamp and you just see the entire thing is just covered with fucking all sorts of weird, creepy crawlies. And you're like, maybe I don't have to piss. I'm just going to sit here. She's gonna hold it till the morning. Yeah,
man, what a
so much shit comes out at night, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Tough
our
environment.
our Green Berets from like the 80s and 70s that were out there, like, you know, I think we got lucky with Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Man.
The jungle is a whole different fucking scenario, man.
Yeah. And the cold weather too. I got a kick out of listening to you guys talk about the cold weather part too. I was one of those guys, man. We were doing cold weather training, and my 18 Delta was looking at my toes and my feet and shit. It's like, man, it was just like cold. Like it's so cold. You can't like really do much. Like,
Yeah.
there's not much we can really do to keep much warmer, but he's like, man, you really need to stop dipping that Copenhagen and shit. Like, it got to that point. I was like, fuck, man, this is bad. Brother can't even enjoy a dip of Copenhagen, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, that dude, the jungle, the cold, man, that's a whole different animal, trying to fight in that shit.
Fuck yeah. The next generation warfare. Yeah, those guys are gonna have a tough one, and if they find themselves back in the jungle, good luck, boys.
Yeah. Especially with all this shit going on with drones and stuff too, man. Like, Russia, Ukraine is like, man, they're killing dudes when they're trying to take a dump out in the woods and stuff.
Dude, we are so fucking lucky. Our generation of guys that made it through Afghanistan. I mean, at the very end, we were using Mavic drones. We were, using it, just to get a little more forward of the line, be able to see what's going out there. But now you weaponize those systems. And it's funny, the younger generation, they've been playing these video games, utilizing drones as weapon systems. And I was explaining this to a friend of mine. I'm like, dude, think about Call of Duty. You kill enough people, you get a drone. Like, we've been talking, and these kids have grown up using drones, and we had switchblades. We had access to a little bit of it. But now, drone warfare and being able to put this shit on social media, people are desensitized. They've seen Ukrainians and Russians get murdered by winged robots for over years, 2-3 years now, on a repeated basis. Nobody gives a fuck, except for guys like us that know what it's like to go to combat and understand that, like, at the end of the day, that is a human being.
Yeah, it really is.
Kids should not be watching this shit on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and looking at the human side of it. Like, the last few seconds of that feed, you see that dude's face.
Yeah.
Right before that drone hits. And I'm just like, this is going to fuck up our kids. We have to innovate and figure out how we're going to defeat this. But man, it is insane warfare.
Yeah.
Insane.
Yeah, it really is, man. Really is.
You retired at 2017?
Yeah, January 2017.
What was your transition like? Because that's the other part that we need to be able to talk about more as soft professionals, understanding that whether you get out as an E7 or a CSM at the group level, transition is something that we're going to all have to face. Like, what was your transition like?
Well, I actually had a good transition, but at the same time, I just shared like one of my lessons learned. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram, but I'm still trying to figure out like what the fuck I'm doing on Instagram. And, me and a buddy were sending DMs and back and forth on LinkedIn. It's like, hey, I just sent you a message. Did you get it on Instagram? I was like, no, man. I was like, maybe that explains why when I send other people messages, they don't get mine. Like, I don't know if it's a follow thing or whatever, but anyway, I'm trying to learn my way on Instagram. I'm really, really active primarily on LinkedIn. And it's interesting that you just asked this question, because I just shared this lesson learned probably a week and a half, 2 weeks ago on LinkedIn. I was like, hey, one of the biggest mistakes I feel like, in my humble opinion, that I made when I transitioned, my official retirement date was January 2017. July of 2016, because I was just doing fucking transition stuff and appointments and all that, I actually started working July of 2016. I had my first big boy job working up in DC. I was actually working at the Museum of the Bible. So I was working from July 2016 through my retirement January 2017. And I worked from July 2016 all the way up to the end of July of 2024, which just a couple of months ago, I worked straight. I worked at the Museum of the Bible as a director of security, director of operations. I worked at one of the top engineering firms in the country, Thornton Tomasetti, on the protective design and security side. Worked for those guys for 2 or 3 years. And then I landed the job of chief of operations at the National Medal of Honor Museum Foundation, which is where I got to know Earl and a bunch of other Medal of Honor recipients that are cool as hell. I did that job for 2.5 years. And now I'm, focused on my book and all of those things. But dude, I work straight. And the lesson that I would like to share with you and the audience is this: fucking take some time for yourself. Take some time to just take a breather, take a knee, drink some water, be in the shade, but just take a little bit of time for yourself. Cause I feel like I rode hard, man. I mean, all 3 of those jobs were very demanding and they took a lot of time away from my family and all of those things. And in my mind, I was just like, man, I got to work. I got to get my daughter through school. My son had already had the GI Bill and all that. But I really, really wish that I would have just taken a couple of months for myself and my family and kind of got a breather and then went and pursued something. Like, the work is always going to be there. I don't give a fuck who you are or what kind of work you're trying to chase. The work is always going to be there. Like, you'll find it or it'll find you. But take a little bit of time for yourself. I didn't. And just kind of felt like I was a little bit burnt out, or a lot burnt out. And it was so nice, August, this past August and September, I've just been focused on the book and trying to set up events and trying to promote it, social media, all that shit. Yeah. It's actually been nice to take a breather, man, and to go on vacations without, answering emails and phone calls and all that shit. So that would be my biggest lesson, and is to take some time for yourself. And a lot of people really focus, on the resume and all that shit, man. Nobody gives a fuck about your resume. I tried to, I was sending cold resumes to like the NFL. Cause that was at one time, that was like my dream job. I was like, oh, I'll fucking be a director of security for fucking Detroit Lions or something, like whatever. Man, fucking nobody looks at those things. Like, all that shit, typically for like those bigger positions, it's like who network type shit. Bingo. Like, really focus on your network and the relationships around, because that's how you're going to find something. All 3 of my jobs that I got post military, well, that one was kind of, before I left the military, but all 3 of the jobs that I got was a result of someone that I knew, networking, talking to people on the phone, all that type of stuff. It wasn't because, I spent $3,000 on a resume or some other bullshit. Like,
there's a lot of scams networking out there. Yep. A lot of scams telling you, we'll generate a resume and we'll get it in front of people. No. Networking, LinkedIn. Guys refuse and constantly bash against it. And then they come back like, okay, you're right. Help me start up a LinkedIn. Too easy. It's too easy. Dude, and then starting to grow that network.
Yeah. Can I say one thing about LinkedIn real quick, man?
Absolutely.
I'm really active on LinkedIn. I try to post 5 days a week. I typically, Saturday and Sunday, I don't typically do anything unless it's kind of like fun bullshit type stuff. But, and I'm trying to learn from other guys. Herb Thompson is one of the guys I look at. And there's a few others. But LinkedIn has given me opportunities just because I post, and I have kind of a system. I'll typically post about like a lessons learned from my military days. I do like a feature Friday. Today I did mine on Tom Satterley and Jen Satterley and the All Secure Foundation, and had a picture and all that stuff. But I will say this, man, LinkedIn has given me opportunities because I post. And I typically do something on like about a speaking engagement or something like that, because with my book coming out, I'm trying to do more speaking engagements. Yeah. So just because I'm posting and I'm regular and I'm consistent and I'm actually interacting with other people too, because there's a ton of people that just post on LinkedIn. They just go in there and they make a post and they're fucking out, man. They don't,
Yeah.
and that fucks up the algorithm. Like they don't, like their stuff's not as effective as the person that's actually interacting and doing it right, or at least what I consider doing it right. I mean, anybody can just go post and then fucking drop, step away from it. But because I've made some of those posts about speaking engagements, I've had other people reach out to me and say, "Hey, Darrell, we need a keynote speaker. Would you come down and do something San Antonio Veterans Day?" It's like, absolutely. Then I get on the phone. I was like, "Hey, I'm just curious. Like, how'd you find me?" "I found you on LinkedIn because I see that your post and you like your speaking engagement stuff. And it's me, I have take a picture, me speaking, and then I'll say some cool shit that I was speaking about that day." And that's what they saw. So the opportunities are there. You just got to be smart about it. Nick Lavery's another guy that I try to learn from just to see how, because he's been doing it forever. And Nick started with a book, his book.
Yeah.
So there's guys out there that you can kind of follow, but there are opportunities and there are tons. I promise you this, and the audience out there listening, there's tons of people that are reading your shit that you don't know that are reading your shit, but they're just kind of like observing, and and something's going to entice them at some point, maybe something that you do, a post, and they're going to reach out to you and they're going to want something, or, "Hey, we'd love to have you come out. We're going to buy 150 copies of your book. You can do our keynote. What's your fee?" Boom.
Yeah.
That's it right there,
It's so true. And the more I engage, the more I learn, and then I'm just focus on authentic engagement.
Yes. That's
like,
it, dude.
Figure out, like, you don't have to come there. I don't know. I don't have background in sales. All I did was go to the military.
Yeah.
Like that's it. I created something. I developed my own plan when it came to podcasting and producing. And now I have a production company. Now I'm producing other people's shows. Like, that's what I talk about. The same thing. You can do the same thing at home. Figure out what you're passionate about. Figure out what you want to get into and start networking and working with these individuals that are already in the space. I think one of the, forget the gentleman's name. He documents his life, talks about what he works, and, he presents this image that he is, has a master's degree, a PhD, and he's super successful. But come to find out, the guy never went to college. He started from the ground up, doing something that nobody else is doing. He found a way to be successful in it.
Love it.
And he shares his story. You can do the same thing at home. You just have to figure out what you're passionate about, figure out what you want to do. And here's, again, another plug for an organization that will help you. When it comes to transition, you don't have to do it alone. When you get to the time when you're starting to look at being able to take advantage of programs, look up the Honor Foundation.
Oh, yeah.
Start taking advantage of these programs that will help you transition, and they will help you set up your LinkedIn for free. You don't have to pay anything. There's people out there that will market themselves as a LinkedIn guru. You don't have to pay them. Don't go for those people. Just go to their place, go find resources that can help you with the entire transition process, such as the Honor Foundation. They help me. They help tons of individuals that have come on the show. So figure out what you want to do, but then actually take some time. Like, that's the one thing that not enough people are saying. And I'm so glad you brought that up. Take some friggin' time. You've got to figure out how to be, a full present father, husband. Take a knee, relax. You owe it to yourself.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought up the Honor Foundation too. They've changed since, I've retired, and I don't know if the names, I think the names changed, the one that I went through, but I did go through something similar to the Honor Foundation. And I'll never forget this, man. I thought this is kind of important too. It's an important point as a learning point. So I was working with a gal, and we were going back and forth, and she was going to help me with my transition and doing interviews and all that shit. And I did all the tests, and then finally she had some feedback for me, and she said, "Darrell, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but do you know what self-deprecating is?" And I was like, not really. Not really. It's a fucking big ass name word. And she said, "Hey, I get the humble part that, you know, Green Berets are humble, but it's almost like too much. It's too much the way you are. Like, I think it's cool in a way, but it's too much because here's the thing, Darrell, you're getting ready to transition and you're going to be on the civilian side. And you've been around guys that, you know, can like look at your uniforms like, oh, you know, Green Beret or, you know, Special Forces, Ranger, Airborne, blah, blah, blah. You know, you can look at someone's uniform real quick and kind of do an assessment, or you've served with that person and you know what they're like in combat, like your reputation. It's like, okay, well, those guys aren't going to be there. You're not going to be wearing Special Forces, Ranger, CIB, all that shit. So you can't be self deprecating. You can't be so humble because you're talking to someone that doesn't fucking know you from Adam. So you got to know, you got to be able to sell yourself and those skills that you had in the military, how those translate to help them. You know, how are your abilities going to help their company? You need to be able to articulate that. And if you're just Mr. Humble Guy, and it's just like, hey, you're the gray guy, like that shit's not going to work on the civilian side. You got to fucking come out of your shell. You got to be able to sell yourself. And that was, man, that was a big learning point for me, dude. That was a big one.
That's a huge one the guys need to understand. It's once you transition out, you have to be able to sell yourself. You have to be able to tell, you know, that provider that hiring manager who you are and what you're about. Like you have to be able to talk about yourself. And it doesn't have to be from a place of like, you know, boastfulness and ego driven, but yeah, be proud of what you've done. Be able to translate that on paper because that's how you're going to get the job. No one's going to walk in there and just throw it at you if you don't talk about yourself. You got to get comfortable doing it.
Yeah, for sure, man. For sure.
Yeah, Darrell, it's been great having you on the show. Again, what's the name of the book?
So the name of the book is Grit to Glory, A Green Beret's Journey from West Virginia to the Streets of Baghdad. It's primarily focused on an 8-month rotation from January to August 2006 that me and my team were in Baghdad. And what's significant about that time period is for maybe some that don't know, in February of 06, a Shia shrine was bombed by Al-Qaeda and it ignited a civil war across Iraq. And we just happened to be at ground zero of this of the civil war igniting, and it got crazy. It got crazy. So there's a lot of stories and missions and the, you know, the things that we went through during that rotation. It also talks about my, you know, kind of growing up from humble beginnings in West Virginia all the way to where we ended up. But it's a great story. I'm obviously biased, but I had a very talented co-author, Laura Noon Gowdy, that helped me with the book. And man, she was great. You can get it. It's available right now for pre-order. And I don't know if we can have the link, you know, once this episode goes live or whatever, but if you go to ballastbooks.com, you can find Grit to Glory. And if you buy it now, if you pre-order it, you're going to get a signed copy. You'll get one of my Special Forces coins, and you'll get it before anybody else. You'll get it on November 11th. So a little over a month away. It's going to go public on the 26th of November. So the pre-orders, you're going to get it a couple of weeks. So that's for pre-order. Once it hits on the 26th, it'll be available, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, all that shit. Another thing, if there's any San Antonio listeners or anybody that wants to join, we're doing a launch party, a book launch, November 20th from 5 to 8 p.m. in San Antonio, Texas at Long Tab Brewery.
Oh, shit.
Excuse me. It's a brewery that's owned by fellow Green Beret, Dave Holland. If you know Dave, I don't know if you do or not, but he was one of the early guys into Afghanistan. I think he was over there in 2002. But him and I are pretty good friends, and we're going to have a great launch. There's going to be food, beer, a few guys from the team that some of the main stars from Grit to Glory are going to be there. So it's going to be an awesome time, and it's going to be a great networking event. So we're super pumped about that. And I just hope that people will go and get the book and pick it up. And it's not just for Green Berets, it's for military folks, it's for first responders, it's for business people. I lay out at the end of the book the principles that really help me get over some of those times when you get punched in the face or you want to elevate and go from exceptional to something even higher. Call it the grit code. So there's a lot of great things in the book, and there's some funny, dark humor, special forces. You got to be on a team to get it. There's a hilarious story about a Hooters outfit. And I'm just going to leave it at that. But a Green Beret Hooters outfit story. I mean, you gotta tune in to listen to that one. But I appreciate the opportunity to be on here just to talk a little bit about it. I'm not a hard guy to find on social media. You can find me on Instagram, my name, and I got the little blue check and all that shit, whatever that means. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Darrell Utt, not a hard guy to find. I'm really active. So yeah, man, I look forward to connecting or following or whatever.
Absolutely. And we'll have all those links on the episode description. So if you're listening right now, pause, go there, click the link, order the book now, or just connect with Darrell as soon as you can, because it's all about growing your network as you're getting out. And I'm sure once you read the book, you realize like you have a lot in common with Darrell and you want to get a hold of him so you can share some stories. That's how we grow our Green Beret team on the outside. That's a great thing about when you get out. Your Green Beret team isn't limited to 12 or 13 guys. You can make it as big, as powerful as you want. Darrell, again, thank you so much for being here, man. I can't wait.
Appreciate you,
place
brother.
my order. And yeah, thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time. Until then, take care. If you like what we're doing and you're enjoying the show, don't forget to share us, like us, subscribe.